Michael, over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michael Downs. I'm Director of Music here at the University of St Andrews. This is an experiment for us all. We, as those of you who live near St Andrews will know, we often host music talks in the Biotheatre Theatre on Wednesday afternoons. But this is the first time we've ever done an online music talk. I'm talking to you from my office in the brand new Laidlaw Music Centre. We're thrilled about how wonderful the building is. We're just a little bit frustrated at the moment that we can't share it with a wider public, but we hope that won't be too long away. In the meantime, we thought we'd whet your appetite with an online music talk. Appropriately enough, it's on the subject of online singing because many people have suffered in many ways from the recent pandemic, but it's been particularly difficult for musicians, and among musicians, particularly difficult for singers for reasons that we will explore in the next 40 minutes or so. I'm very grateful to be joined by 5 colleagues who you will hopefully see on your screens. I will introduce them in alphabetical order. Tania Holland Williams is a singer and opera director based in Kent. Although she mainly works in the south of England, she has also worked a lot with us in St Andrews in both capacities. She's sung as a soloist with me with the St Andrews Chorus many times, and she's also directed 3, I think, Bayer operas, Albert Herring, Turn of the Screw, and most recently Handel's Xerxes. So great to have you back with us, Tania, in this online form. Claire Innes-Hopkins, by contrast, is not in Kent, but is sitting about 3 meters away from me in the next office in the Laidlaw Music Centre. Claire joined us 2 and a bit years ago as Director of Chapel Music, and she combines that role with a freelance career as organist, examiner, teacher, many other things as well. Rebecca Loughran is a 3rd year student of neurosciences here at the University of St Andrews and is a member of St Salvator's Chapel Choir under Claire. And conveniently, she is also a vocal student of our next guest, Megan Reid, who is also based in Fife, who has sung extensively across Scotland and beyond, particularly with Scottish opera, and is also an associate teacher here at the Music Centre. And our final panelist needs little introduction, but I will introduce him anyway. John Wallace is one of the best known trumpeters of the whole post-war era anywhere in the world. He was principal of the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland until very recently. He's also a native Fifer with strong connections with St Andrews, which are becoming ever stronger by the moment, because we're working with him very regularly on a wonderful new music outreach project called STAMP, which stands for St Andrews Music Participation, which you will be hearing a lot more about in future months. So great to have you all with us for this inaugural and somewhat experimental online music talk. But now over to the substance of the day's concern, which is how on earth do you do something as counterintuitive as singing online? All of our 5 panelists have quite distinct and different experiences and perspectives on that. So I'm going to hand over to them now to tell us a little bit about their experiences. And Megan has kindly agreed to be the first volunteer. So Megan, over to you.
Thanks, Michael. Obviously, my experience so far has been teaching. We had a rather 0 to 60 effect with the teaching, completely shut down and then online, which I think presented its own challenges, definitely. From somebody who doesn't do an awful lot of technology other than you know, the odd Word document, maybe a spreadsheet, going for the hardware, the software, following all the fora online, trying to figure out what microphone we needed, whether I needed speakers or headphones. There was a challenge in that, obviously. But what I would say overall is I think it's been really pretty good, actually. It's worked surprisingly well. I was probably a skeptic beforehand, particularly for classical singing. I knew that Skype lessons were a big thing for pop singers. But I thought, well, there's no way that you can sing loud and high and still work with people. But I think actually it's been pretty good. After the first initial bit where we're working with people and you go through the same schedule with everybody, can you turn on your original sound? Can you do this with your microphone? Can you do that? It actually works quite well. I think, I'm not sure I'm allowed to mention particular platforms, but some platforms have worked really hard, obviously, to get as good an experience for singers, for musicians.
I think, Megan, just into it, I think you are allowed to mention particular platforms as long as you make it clear that the University of St Andrews does not endorse any particular platform.
Well, I would say the ones that have adjustability with audio settings, but actually a lot of them work quite well. I have some who use an Apple one, the FaceTime, that can work quite well, but the Zoom that we're on now actually seems to have the best audio settings that I've found for teaching. So the first impressions, as I say, were very positive. When I started working with students, we might have been in the middle of getting a recital prepared and we suddenly had to start working online. But actually the sound isn't bad. Sometimes the caveat for that would be very high or very loud. If a student has a good microphone, that makes a big difference. But even an iPad or an iPhone or any kind of phone or laptop actually is not too bad if the settings are correct. I think there have been definite benefits to it in the way that you wouldn't get from maybe face-to-face teaching. I think obviously the internal audiation, the ear skills that singers are having to develop is definitely improving. Having to sing on your own, having to sing unaccompanied, having to do call and response, which is a different thing for a lot of singers. Having to do that has been a great skill. But I think the reason it has worked, and I'm sure that I'm sure that instrumentalists would find the same thing about this, not just singers, is that I think the role of a teacher is very much as a guide. You guide your students how to practice, how to approach the structure of a song. You give them exercises to work on. So all of those things can still happen online. You're doing some of the exercises and you can hear them, but actually you're just giving them the tools to continue working. So I think that's probably the main reason it's worked well, is that aspect of lessons, the aspect of tuition is still there. I do think there are some limitations. I think clearly the latency, the fact that it isn't the same time, does present some problems, not in every lesson and not in every way that you're teaching. But that lack of collaboration in the music making can be difficult. It means that we have to rely much more, as I say, on call and response things, people singing unaccompanied. I personally have missed the collaborative aspect of it. There is a sort of coaching part of most lessons, particularly actually with choral scholars who may have been told that week or the week before that they've got a solo to learn and they maybe need some help with it in a lesson. And that's something that I would normally give some support with. I would maybe fill in some vocal parts. I would maybe do some chord structures underneath. And I'm not able to do that in quite the same way. So that can be quite difficult. I think that beginners and younger students struggle without the musical support. Not everybody, but a substantial amount struggle without that support of a piano working with them. It's something that, as I say, there are benefits with the fact that you're learning more ear skills, but it's something that I'm looking forward to accompanying again. I think the other thing is that we have all these backing tracks now that we use, which is great that we have them, and I've made some for my students, but it's a very, very different skill to sing to a backing track than to sing live. And a lot of the students at St Andrews in particular are actually at the stage where they're really trying to start working on their performance skills, which include leading and having the creative control of music rather than just following a backing track. So they're learning a new skill with singing with a backing track, but they're also perhaps not really working that skill of leading, of really being in charge of a phrasing for a song. So that's definitely something that I'm looking forward to again, to when we can get back to face, is to continue. I suppose it's that sheer joy of making music with somebody in a room. And I think that's what we're all missing, probably more than anything else. The technical aspects, the working aspects, those are all possible and actually work really well online. But I think we miss being in the same space and getting the energy, which means I think, as well as I think it's working for now, I think it will hopefully just be an add-on in the future. I'm hoping it's not going to replace everything. I'm hoping we are going to see each other live again in person someday, because we need that energy of being in rooms with people. But I do think it's so important that people still have this creative outlet. I mean, I know myself in lockdown, being able to still see my students was so nice. To just see their smiling faces and to hear them, it was so important. And for the students, I hope, seeing my smiling face and giving encouragement to them meant that they could still have some creative expression in their lives, which is so important. And I hope that the fact that we've all missed it so much means that it will come back stronger in the end. And that's, I suppose, what I think about online singing.
Thank you very much, Megan. That's absolutely terrific, and would endorse everything you say, particularly about the value of actually being in the same room. Claire, could I come on to you? Claire keeps being plunged into darkness because our lights in this new building are set on a very environmentally friendly but rather
annoying
setting, which if we don't fling our arms about every 5 minutes, they tend to go off. But anyway, Claire, over to you for your experience of online singing and direction.
Okay, thank you, Michael. So I direct St. Salvator's Chapel Choir here at the university. And obviously with a choir, there is a big issue with how on earth do we sing together in the online platform. When lockdown first happened, we were still completely in the middle of semester. Ideally, the choir should have been singing 3 services every week. So we were like, what do we do? So we did 2 things at that point. Our services went onto Zoom, and we had singers from the choir singing on their own bits of plain song and hymns and maybe some short anthems as well. And we also did this big thing, which was all over social media, virtual choirs. Now, contrary to what people thought at the time, that was not 30 singers on Zoom together pressing the record button, because if you've tried that, it's just a complete mess. Because of course, with the latency issues, you cannot have 30 people all singing at the same time on Zoom, unfortunately. So in order to put those virtual choir videos together, I would create a backing track and record myself conducting to the backing track, put those together, send it out to the choir. They would then individually record their own part singing against the backing track. They would send that to me, and then I would put all 30 together to make your final video. The results for this were actually quite satisfying. The end product sounded pretty good. But obviously what was missing was actually singing with other people. I've sung in some of those myself, and it was quite fun to record them, especially when you were doing it with your friends and stuff, and then could see them next to you in the video at the end. But of course, it was an isolating process because you were just singing your part. So that was one thing that we did. Coming into this semester, we've got a brand new choir with 10 new singers in it, I think. And we have left that idea behind, and we have been trying to run some rehearsals online. Now, that is also very interesting. Again, we're using Zoom, and the important thing in running online choir rehearsals is that actually every single person, apart from the conductor, has to be on mute. So I have this wonderful full screen of smiley faces singing at me, but I cannot hear anything that they are doing. So unfortunately, I can't hear what it sounds like, but it's quite interesting that you can still pick up on, for example, posture, whether they've printed out the music or are using an iPad, whether they're sitting down or trying to do something else at the same time. So that's been quite interesting, but generally it's been really nice to see the singers very much engaged with what's going on and the rehearsal, which of course has to be done entirely differently to how you would normally do a rehearsal, because it's a complete one-man show, and you are generating everything for this group of people, the enthusiasm, keeping it going, and the music. So there's a lot to sort of try and juggle. And given that you can't hear people, you kind of have to guess what might have gone wrong or potentially what would be worth working on. So we've done quite a lot of singing pieces through so that people get familiar with repertoire. And while we do that, I play the piano so that the singers have something to sing against. And we've maybe taken a few bits apart to work on individual parts. And we've also done some games as well, which has been quite fun. In choir, we do lots of things like up, down, same, depending on where the notes are going, or using scale degree numbers, and the singers have to hold up the numbers while they're singing the right notes, which really gets the brains working and also looks hilarious on screen. So that's been fun. And actually, we were able to do some outdoor singing on Saturday in octets. What was really fascinating was that we had 4 completely brand new octets, had never sung together before, but the ensemble was fantastic. And who knows, is that because we were able to do a few online rehearsals and kind of get to know each other a bit in that platform? Or is it just because nobody sung together for 6 months and that they were so excited about doing it that they were just doing a brilliant job? So I think that's sort of an interesting point, really. So there are things we can do that are kind of working, but obviously we are just massively missing the interaction with fellow musicians and fellow people, really.
Thank you very much indeed, Claire. And I should mention that the results of Claire's work with the octets will be available on the standrewsvoices.com website. We're about, well, today is the first day of the virtual St. Andrews Voices event, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the videos that Claire has been doing with those octets from the choir. And that's a very good point to come over to Rebecca and ask you about your experiences on the other end of the things that Megan and Claire have been talking about so far.
Yeah, so as Claire was saying, over lockdown we had some virtual pieces put together. Over lockdown, it was just brilliant to have a reason to sing. I find it, I've done music for years and years and never sort of lost, a leader or some form of accountability for having to sing. So having that over lockdown, I found was really great. I mean, when you're in maybe the middle of your 4th or 5th take and suddenly one of your parents walk into your room and you have to scrap it and start again. And I think I've never been as self-critical of my own voice as when I was doing those individual recordings, because suddenly every note you really notice. And, I think it really did improve me actually as a singer, despite the fact I was, singing on my own. Coming back to university, I was really hoping, the Scottish government guidelines were going to allow us to sing. I have 2 younger brothers that went back to playing football at the start of summer. I was like, why are they able to go and, grab the football off each other and I can't sing in a room with my friends? So coming back and finding out, it wasn't going to be all in person, I was quite disappointed initially. But I have to say, all my experiences so far online have been really, really positive. my first sort of experience coming back was what would have been St Sylvester's Chapel Choir's sort of pre-season. And I remember receiving the email and thinking, I don't really understand how this is going to work, and all the new faces and everything, just didn't really get it. But again, it was just so nice to be singing, and so nice to be seeing other people singing. I find it actually really interesting how the brain works, in that when you have your sheet music in front of you and you can see everyone's mouths moving at the same time, and you can hear the other parts being played on the piano by Claire, it's almost as if you do start to piece together the choir, especially those members that I've sang with for the last couple of years. I can suddenly hear their voices on a particular part in a piece I recognise. Specifically when we were singing the Bluebird, you could hear the soprano solo over the top, even though, you know, it was just a note on a piano. Yeah, I also feel like when you're singing on your own, obviously, you usually have the support in a choir of the rest of your part. Learning new pieces, we were learning new pieces for the Dawn Chorus recordings, and there's some bits, you know, where it would have been great to have someone else there singing that particular part, because it would have just, you know, sort of give you more confidence. So I feel like sight reading wise, it actually has been it's been an experience that has improved my sight singing. Obviously, you know, there's drawbacks to singing online. For me, I'm very lucky. My flatmates, I could fluffy puppy up and down in front of them all day, and they're not going to mind, and I'm not going to feel uncomfortable. But I know for some singers within the choir, and for those doing solo lessons as well, at home, you know, if they're first year and they're in halls of residence, or they maybe aren't as comfortable with their flatmates, or I did have one experience during a lunchtime rehearsal when I was warming up on a Monday, and my flatmate in the next room was on a tutorial, and her tutor was like, do I hear singing? She's like, yeah, it's just my flatmate warming up. So there's issues like that. Again, you know, it's not the real thing. The experience of singing in an octet at the weekend, you know, as Claire said, it was so good after not singing together for so long. And I do believe that it's because suddenly, you can hear these other people's voices, and you want to listen to them more, and you want to blend with them more, and just really produce a great piece of music. Singing lesson wise, I've only had one session so far with Megan, and another one coming up at the weekend. I'm not very good at technology, despite, you know, being in a technological era now. So there was a while, as Megan was saying, you know, how to turn on your microphone, that you're picking up people doing their warm-ups and background noise and everything like that. But I think these are things, yeah, that we're all going to get better at the more we do them. But yeah, overall, I would say that so far it's been a really positive experience, and I believe it can only get better. And I'm really thankful that I have, you know, Wi-Fi and a laptop, and people who are willing to use their time to do this, so that we can keep on singing.
Thank you, Rebecca. That's terrific, and actually really heartening to know, you know, that all the hard work that Claire and others have put in has had such a fantastic benefit. I think the point you make about knowing other people's voices already is really interesting, and being able to intuit them in your ear, that's fascinating. We might come back to that a little bit later. I'd like to turn now to our two visitors who've both had very distinct and unusual experiences, I think, of singing online. Tania, over to you first, if I may.
Hi, thanks, Michael. This is really fascinating. When lockdown began, I was just about to launch on a new project that essentially was called Soft Mirrors, and was going to involve a large community chorus holding the hands of each audience member and singing straight into their faces. So it got completely and utterly shelved, probably binned, I think is a better way of putting it. And a huge sort of like big question mark emerged, I think, for most of us that are in this world, but definitely for me, which was, and it had several parts. What is our relationship now with our audience? Because it is completely different when we're not in the same room with them. What is our relationship with our fellow music makers? Because again, if we can't hear them, how do we, I love that what Rebecca just said about sort of being able to see each other via various bits of technology so that we can at least intuit and get a sense of energy from them. And also, how are we going to, for me anyway, it was a massive question about how the number of communities that I work with, how are they going to have the skills and the equipment to come on a journey? So I think that, right at the beginning of April this year, there were just a shed load of questions, and over the last 8 months or so, I feel like part of my journey has just been looking at what, like you guys, what's working and what doesn't work so well. And one of the first things was about the thing about groups of singers. So the community choirs that I ran, who would want to be part of a community choir online, and how was that possible? And what I found in general was about a third. I had about a third uptake across the various different communities, and it didn't sort of matter whether they were communities of younger people or it was a so it wasn't, I felt like it wasn't necessarily to do with being very well connected to current technologies. I felt that played a part, but it was also for me starting to realise that there were reasons that people joined community choirs that didn't have, that had something to do with singing, but also had to do with belonging, and an exchange of sort of, over the coffee at the break. So where, in tailoring those experiences across the course of a couple of months, I realised that it wasn't enough for me to only send MP3 files, conduct from the piano, and that was fine, and people went on a great journey, I think, as Megan said, of various oral skills becoming much better. I had histories of, accounts of people saying, I've never sung out loud in my own home before, and now I am. And so that was wonderful to hear. But I think that the thing that there were two things that I felt missing. One was I wasn't getting any reward, which was actually quite a big thing, I realised, and not being able to hear what people were doing and sort of engage in that. And also the coffee break moment. We could have it and we all went off in our own directions and had a coffee, but actually that's sort of finding ways of encouraging people to maintain a discourse outside of the actual Zoom interface became quite important. And I think then started to think about a number of other things, and I'll just very quickly whiz through them. So some of the things over the last couple of months that I've been playing around with has been this idea of bringing choristers in to get a sense of the context of the storytelling that they're doing. Some of that was looking very closely at how operatic arias and character narratives are drawn up, using the time to really think about sort of physical skills, the physicality of singing and how we use our body for gesture. So it became for me a bit of a challenge on how can people grow and maintain or even grow new core skills that are going to continue to impact them when we do eventually get back into a combined space. It all sort of culminated in eventually a mini opera that we did recently at the Tete Festival, which involved a live cellist and live singer, socially distanced, and an online sort of chorus that actually didn't make sound at the end of it. I think in the longer term we will be introducing that, but in the short term it became one technical object too much. The key thing, I suppose, just in summation, was that the challenge for me is that whatever we're doing right now is an incomplete transaction, and so the more we can do to make a complete transaction, the more we will maintain our essential contact with our audiences. Okay.
Thank you very much, Tania. Firstly, very impressed that your backdrop changed in conjunction with whatever you were talking about. I mean, you hands down win the tech award for this afternoon by virtue of that alone. Some really interesting things in there. I'm really interested to know that the proportion of people taking up the choral possibilities didn't change according to age group or apparent technological ability. That's really interesting. Also really like your phrase at the end, the incomplete transaction. That's a really nice way of putting it. John, over to you for your experience, please.
Well, like Tania, I'm really exercised by keeping contact with our audiences out there, and also with the incredible culture that we have of, music making and dramatic art through the country. We've been through a bit of a golden age, I think, in the last 30 or 40 years. But I'm coming at it from a slightly different perspective, in that I'm someone amongst the many musicians who depends on choirs and opera societies and companies to put on concert shows and events so that we can play with them and accompany with them, because people tend to forget that instrumental musicians don't only play in symphony orchestras. So by far the greatest part of the work is playing in dramatic staged events. And choirs and these societies are part of the great amateur and professional synergy that makes up the musical culture of the UK, more perhaps than any other country in the world. So what have I been involved in since March? Well, one of the things was I chair the Music Education Partnership Group, which is set up to advocate for something that we think has been under threat for many years, but we've got our fingers in the dike and we're stemming the flow, we think, as well as we can. So we put together a symphony of 1,000 voices and instruments on Zoom. It was Hey Jude we chose in the end because, again, we had to be pragmatic. We found all the same problems as Claire, in that it has to be a synthetic approach, but we wanted as many people to come as possible, so we got Jimmy McMillan to lay down the beat and conduct. We thought he would be a draw, and we got Tinderbox, a youth club group, which is very sort of tech savvy. There's a couple of guys there that run it in Edinburgh, and they put the whole post-production thing together for us, because you need when we had about 1,000 people on it, which you can do on Zoom, and I think the end result really worked. It was great fun, but it was make believe. Everybody got dressed up, and it's what I think of as fantasy camping. You can mouth the words and you can be one of the Beatles without ever being it, but it's fantasy camping compared to real life singing, I think. And then in the more classical vein, a choir I've been involved with for a long time through its director, Simon Wright, has been the Leeds Festival Chorus, and that's the one that Walton wrote Belshazzar for. And I've just been doing Come Ye Sons of Art with them online, and everything again has got to be pre-recorded because of this latency problem that we have, but it is keeping the choir motivated, just like Becca has said, that that just it keeps you motivated for the time that you can get together in Fountains Abbey in the summer and sing with other people, but it's a really challenging thing to do, to sing on your own when you've been used to being surrounded by lots of people. So it may just be improving the ability to keep time and use a metronome and all of these things. You get a click. I mean, I was amazed the other day to find out that Chopin actually had a metronome. I mean, the king of rubato had a metronome on his piano, which is unbelievable. But everyone is missing the thrill that we've all spoken about being surrounded by this vibrating sound that you can't really replicate. You feel the sound as well as hearing it, which you don't get on the online situation. And then I think Michael asked us before, what's the potential to take this further? And like Tania, I've been thinking about the combining the live and also the visceral effect that a screen full of thousands of, or maybe just even 12 people behind you could have. Now, I went to a performance at the Munich Opera a couple of years back of Zimmermann's Die Soldaten, when they did that sort of thing. And, it had multiple things going on at once, and it was incredibly dramatically effective. So I've just written a one-man, one-act opera for the tenor, Jamie McDougall, because he's got the sort of personality that I wanted. It has a Zoom chorus, like Tania has been advocating, with whom he has to interact like a circus master, because when I used to be a player, I had quite a lot of contact with people who treated their choirs almost like that, like David Wilcox, Philip Ledger. It wasn't far from being, a circus. They really kept control in that way, because I think the immediacy of an opera chorus, you have to have a chorus to keep the drama driving forward. And I'm thinking this way because I think this pandemic may be with us and its results for longer than we think. About 2 weeks ago, I'm a Penderecki nut, and I went into this Penderecki memorial concert from the concert hall in Wrocław, and it was a live stream, and they had the NDR chorus up there, and they were socially distanced at a meter, and they had the orchestra and everything. Subsequently, 70% of the chorus have gone down with COVID, and previous, that Poland had a very, very good record, and it's just crept up on them. So I'm afraid our little friends, these viruses, are almost are more clever than we think. So we have to. I think we have to develop this as much as we can to keep, music making intact, so that when we do come out of the other end of it, perhaps end of 21, 22, sometime like that, we will, have all of this rapidly developing technology, which will then enhance the liveness of everything. So that's my bit, Michael.
Thank you very much indeed, John. That's terrific. Do you have a planned date for the opera with Jamie yet?
Well, Jamie was on tour in Germany when he got it, and he was very excited. And he came back to me saying, "Oh, it's great, let's do that." And then I haven't heard from him for a week or so. So I hope he hasn't got cold feet.
Well, maybe we're keeping him busy here. I'm sure he hasn't, but those of you who are interested, Jamie will be launching a new songbook, Scottish songbook project, as the final event in St Andrew's Voices this coming Saturday. So we'll be seeing Jamie then, and maybe after that he'll turn his attention back to John's opera. I'm sure he hasn't got cold feet at all. Thank you for those 5 terrific perspectives. This is the point where, if we were all sitting in chairs in the Bayer Theatre, I would now invite questions from the audience. Maybe for a future such event, we can get Bede to be even more clever than he already has been and put in a chat bar so we can have questions, but we haven't quite got that far today. So what I will do in the short amount of remaining time we've got is ask any of the panelists if they have questions for any of the other panelists based on what we've just heard. Silence is terrible on radio. I know this isn't radio, but Megan, thank you very much.
Mine's less the question, but I'd be interested in everyone else's experiences. I think that vocal health through this is potentially suffering. I think that singing into a screen is not massively helpful for most people. It's in too narrow a focus. I'd be really interested to know whether anyone teaching choirs has had any feedback from people. Some of my students, I think, maybe are struggling. I'm trying to work hard to give them exercises to make sure they maintain their health when they're doing it. But I just wondered if anyone had had any feedback from their choirs, potentially also people who actually don't often sing on their own. I think Tania mentioned the fact that she's working with community choirs, and I've taught through the choral course in the summer some singers who really don't like singing on their own. they only like to sing with other people. They like hiding. They don't want to express themselves on their own. And they might be the sort of people who would struggle perhaps, you know, with health after this. I don't know whether Tania or Claire had any feedback.
I think that one of the reasons that it was a third wasn't just to do with technology. I think that for some, particularly community choirs, choristers, singing alone in their living room or in their kitchen is such a vulnerable act, a vulnerability making act, that's why they elected not to join in. I think I agree with you about things like the soft, I'm noticing, although and this is in some of the one-to-one with some choristers, soft palates are dropping, articulators are becoming less pronounced, you know, so different bits of the singing infrastructure is just slightly losing its edge. So I think that there's a couple of things that I would say. I absolutely agree with you about the singing into the screen. So one of the exercises that I regularly get singers to do that I'm working with, I have several different points of sight lines. So one is to the mountains, and this is so one of the things that I think is I found very incumbent on me, both directing and working with singers, is to find more routes to the imagination than I might normally. If I'm in a room, I might be very sort of physiologically, I still think that that's very important, but I'm finding I'm having to work quite hard to remind people to be in an imagination communicative space. So this exercise is about 3 points, one of which is a viewpoint which is to the mountains and is quite a long way away. The second is to imagined people around you, and the third is a sort of nostalgic and memory space. So working with people in those 3 different spaces, funny little things start to happen internally, I find, with the soft palate, the relaxing of the jaw, and various other sort of more technical things. And I'm finding if I get too technical through this interface, tension immediately, because everybody's sort of so focused on this tiny little window, everything starts to seize up. So that's been just an interesting observation. Yeah. Claire,
Thank you. I'm interested in Rebecca's take on this, actually, because although you must have sang on your own a lot, possibly not in quite the way that you've been asked to recently, how have you found it simply from a physical point of view?
Yeah, well, I feel in choir rehearsals when you're by yourself and you're muted, it's very easy to just relax yourself, to not be working as hard as you need to not be taking breaths in the right places, to not be enunciating as well as you usually do. Obviously, I'm from Northern Ireland. I tend to change my vowels to fit the English singers around me and things like this. And last Thursday, actually, I sang a complin in the chapel, and I was just singing the hymn, and it was like I didn't even know my voice that was coming out of me, because it had been so long since I had to use it to its full sort of potential and to really be singing out. And I think it is going to be something that Per Megan's going to be challenged with sort of helping me get back, because I am noticing things like my soft palate dropping, and not putting in as much work as I would have been when you had the accountability of someone in front of you giving you that constructive feedback all the time.
Thank you very much. Yes. Any other questions that anyone on the panel would like to ask anyone else?
I've got a question, which is about how do we feel about how important it is to have a live audience as performers? How important is it to us to find another live body?
That's a terrific question. I just an hour before starting this discussion, I was in the Laidlaw Music Centre in our recital room. There was a singer, Alicia Fashai, giving a terrific recital, and the audience in the room were 4. The cameraman, Chris Bragg, putting together the live stream, Jonathan Kemp doing the sound, and me having introduced the concert. And what was striking, apart from the quality of the concert, was just how many of our gestures are predicated on there being an audience in the room, and how peculiar it must be for a performer to give a concert without an audience in the room. Anyone else's thoughts on that, please?
Yes, I think it's essential to have an audience. I don't think it matters how many are there, but if you saw Keir Starmer's performance yesterday, it's a very good speech, but it really suffered from not having an audience there. You could tell he was very, very uncomfortable. So when you have got something to put over a message and the words and everything, as a singer has, unless you've got someone there, you would have to have a huge experience of former performances to imagine an audience there to put it over to. So you do need an audience, whether physical or imaginary, I think. Preferably physical.
Thank you. Anyone else? Any thoughts on that? I don't. Megan, yeah.
Well, it's interesting because clearly all my performances were cancelled since this has happened, so I haven't had the live experience of it. But I do think My husband said to me once, actually, he said, is it not scary to stand in front of people? And I said, well, no, they're normally smiling. So it's actually quite a nice thing. And yes, that feedback, we don't get the feedback from it. Now, if you're on a big stage, you can't see people, but there is a sort of maybe slightly sometimes menacing feeling of breathing. You can tell the atmosphere of any concert hall, even if you can't see people, there is something there. But I think John's point about any audience, actually. So for people doing concerts, say in the Laidlaw, just having the three of you there probably made a massive difference. I would say having somebody to sing to rather than just a computer would make a big difference, actually.
Claire.
Well, I mean, as an organist, you are routinely giving organ recitals to very few members of the audience. And it genuinely doesn't matter if you're doing a lunchtime concert and there's 8 people there, that's still 8 people who are really going to enjoy the experience. And yeah, as the performer, you really don't mind if it's 8 or 80 or 800.
But would you mind if it was 0? I mean, that's really,
yes,
because you can't see your audience as an organist.
Well, yeah, I think not seeing your audience is a problem. Like, I mean, I've always thought there are 3 people involved in a piece of music: the composer and their interpretation of the music, the performer and how they interpret the music, and the listener in terms of how they experience it. And I think all 3 of those people need to be involved in a musical performance, really, for it to properly count.
Thank you. We're almost out of time, but I'd just like to ask everyone to comment just briefly on what do you think will change. Let's hope we do eventually get out of this situation. Maybe John's right, it's not going to be till 2022. Let's hope it's slightly sooner than that. But I think this has been a very positive discussion. I think all of you have pointed to things that we can take. Let's imagine a time that is definitely post-COVID, not sort of in between, but 2025, 2030, whatever it is. What do you think, in a nutshell, we will have gained from the experience that we've had over the last 6 months or so? Maybe if we could take it in the same order that we spoke in originally, beginning with Megan.
So a post-COVID world, it's hard to imagine, isn't it? I think I said before, just the appreciation of it. I mean, I can't even think about how emotional I'll be when I first sing with other people. There's that. But I also do think that there have been opportunities as well, and I hope they continue. I think obviously the world is getting more global. We have many more opportunities for professional development. I went to a webinar recently with somebody who was in Seattle. So I managed to get that development with her. And I hope that these things will continue. The fact that we now have this technology and we're better at it, that we will be able to continue doing that, hopefully.
Thanks. I think the accessibility of people from a long way around the world is a huge one, actually. And I think that's a very, very definite.
Potentially a downside to that. I do, as a hopefully viable, somebody with a hopefully viable job, I think the internationalism, there will be more competition. And I think that's something that everybody's going to have to deal with. The fact that perhaps we don't have a local market anymore, we have to think about how we're competitive. So I think there are definitely plus sides, but we need to be careful of the downsides for that. I think that some organizations are notorious for getting whatever cheap or suggestible labor that they can, so we need to make sure we're careful about that.
St Andrews, I should say, is not one of those organizations, but I think you raise a really important point, and actually it comes down to really articulating the value of being in the room, or the completeness of, or completing Tania's incomplete transaction. Claire, could I ask you for a quick reflection on what will change post-COVID?
Well, I mean, hopefully when we get back to making music as we were before, number one, everyone will hopefully just be so filled with joy that we can do it again, that will, you know, help increase people's ability and standards and love for music. And going further than that, hopefully it will mean that more people are attracted to being involved in music, either as a listener or as a performer or in the community. Like, I'd have thought community music engagement is a real opportunity for spreading that net much wider.
Thank you. Yeah, yes, indeed. Rebecca, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key word is appreciation. Appreciation for having music, and especially in a time when people's mental health, during this whole pandemic, has been so low. I know that music has really helped a lot of people. My grandmother, for example, started playing the piano again for the first time in 30 years over lockdown. And I think, the last thing I did pre-COVID was singing a concert in Sally's Chapel with the Magical Group. And it was hugely emotional because we knew that was it. We were going home and the government was going to shut us all down. So I think post-COVID, I can't even imagine the emotional response that the singers and the audience as well will have. The appreciation just will be like never before, I think.
Thank you. I am absolutely sure you're right about that. Tania?
I've got this hopeful vision that what happens is that we take the best of what we are learning now about increased accessibility and the ability to work collaboratively with maybe people. The opera that we did had people from Scotland, people from Barking, Essex, Kent, joining in a chorus that we never would have been able to do if we were doing it live. So there's part of me that has got this vision for a choral rehearsal where you've got your 40, 100, however many is real live singers in the room, and you're also beaming the rehearsal into a care home or a space where people find it much more difficult to come and join us. I think that would be a wonderful outcome from the stuff that we're learning.
Thank you. And John?
Well, when you keep this many people cooped up for this long, what's going to happen is that you're going to have a huge boom come, the early to mid 20s. It's going to be like the roaring 20s all over again, the jazz age. Who knows what new genres will come out of this, but already Tanya's, for thinking, getting into that melting pot cauldron, doing it. And I think it will allow us to become both local and global, if you like. And, it's like the National Theatre before the lockdown was running, events in a small theatre with 300 people that has been streamed to 100,000 people. Now we can all do that, so I think that will be de rigueur. It's so hard. You put so much effort into putting on one of these events. Why don't you make it available to the whole world? So I think there's just going to be a huge boom after it. You just cannot suppress the human race, and they love the music and the opera and the choirs. So we just have to batten down the hatches until, this virus that wants to have us for its lunch just sort of comes into, until we learn to deal with it, really.